Thank you for participating in the Business Enhancement Series, presented by Efficiency United, Indiana Michigan Power, and Semco Energy Gas Company. In this next section, we're going to be talking about cold calling techniques. There are a ton of different possible lead generation activities that we can pursue. Advertising, direct mail, networking, and cold calling is just one of these. We're going to take a look at cold calling as a possibility for you and look at some ways you might make it work better. In fact, that's why we talked about your target market first, knowing that is the basis for success in any marketing plan. So why don't we like cold calling? Well, you got the 3 R's: rejection, reputation, return on effort. And you could probably put rejection in there again. Signs like this, of course, the dreaded no-call lists and the canned spam act, point to the idea that some people just don't like being on the receiving end of cold calling. For most of us, the fact that they don't really want to receive it means that we don't want to do it. It's pretty simple. Then we'll talk about each of them in order to determine how we can overcome that obstacle. So the 3 R's: rejection. Most people have a problem doing any activity where they'll be facing rejection. 90 to 90% of the time. I mean, would you want to do something that you fail at most of the time? Reputation damage. Especially if done poorly, cold calling can actually damage the reputation of your business. It might even lead to lawsuits, fines. Sometimes it's actually better not to do cold calling at all if you're not going to do it right. And of course, return on effort. For many, there's a perception that cold calling doesn't really work and the effort involved doesn't convert into real results. Should we just give up as a bad plan? Maybe, maybe not. We're going to look at each problem and you will evaluate whether it's the right plan for you. All right, dealing with rejection. No one likes it, and if you can't get past it, you'll just run into what's called call fatigue. You won't do your cold calling, so it won't be something that's part of your marketing plan. What can you do to reduce the rejection, or at least deal with it a little bit better? First, improve your conversion rate. That's the rate at which you get appointments with your calls. Getting rejected 9 times out of 10 is better than 99 times out of 100, right? More on how to do this later. Second is change the way you look at rejection. It's not personal. Those who succeed understand they aren't rejecting your personality, just your product or the way you're selling it. It's an obstacle to surmount. It's part of the hunt. These rejections are just barriers between you and success. You're not going to harpoon a shark on every shot. And think of it as part of the process. Thomas Edison said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." You're not forcing somebody to do business with you. Here's a big one. Hire someone else to do it. If you don't enjoy it, if you're not good at it, can you be more effective for your business elsewhere? You might have to pay more for someone who's good at cold calling. You'll have a process to teach those people to do the job. And without oversight, they might get you into trouble, because if you compensate them based on their leads, and that leads to dishonesty, that's when we start talking about the other R, the next one, reputation damage. So how could cold calling ruin your reputation? Well, usually only when you hire someone to call for you, because why would you promise what you couldn't deliver? May they promise what you can't deliver. Maybe they sell a service you don't offer, or they might sell a service you do offer at a price you don't. Make sure they know what you offer and for how much if they're doing the sale. Most of the time we receive a cold call, we say we're not interested, and within 10 minutes we've forgotten it. Every once in a while, though, we get one of those pushy salespeople who we do remember, not in a good way, for years. Have a script with clear guidelines of where the limits are. Understand that a disqualified prospect might still be able to connect you to other opportunities. There are numerous state and federal regulations which govern telemarketing and cold calling. Running afoul of these can not only lead to damaging your brand, but might also lead to fines. Some rules: no calls before 8 a.m. or after 9 p.m. You must maintain a do not call list. You must identify yourself and your company at the beginning of the call. No robocalling unless you have express written permission. And you also have to check the national do not call list at least once a month. So it's important to know what return on effort is worth your time. So a study done at Keller Research Center at Baylor University had 50 experienced and qualified sales professionals in real estate make calls using an identical script. Out of the 6,264 calls made, check out these statistics. 1,037 of the numbers weren't even working, and 3,450 of them, nobody answered. So in other words, 71.6% of the calls failed right off the bat. They never even reached a live person. Of the remaining 28.4%, where the agent did connect with a live person, 929, that's 14.8%, said they weren't interested, flat out. So of the remaining, only 19 turned into actual appointments. So they converted. That's a conversion rate of 0.3%. Assuming you can make 50 calls an hour, that means you have to call for almost 7 hours before you get a single appointment. Doesn't sound great. We'll go into the metrics in a moment, but just think about this. Let's say once you get into the appointment, your closing rate is 20%. That would mean you'd have to work about a week just calling to result in one sale. Costs include either your opportunity cost, which means you can't really do the work if you're making calls, or your staff costs to hire somebody. So depending on what you can afford and how good of a person, that's going to affect everything on the list. And don't forget to cost assemble that list. Is it worth it? It depends. If the cost is less than the profit, then yes. Pretty simple, right? But you got to look at all the costs involved. Let's do the necessary analysis to determine if the cold calling is worth the results. So if the additional costs don't exceed the amount you make on the job, then yes. Now you got to think about it. What's your real profit on a job? You've got to think about the employee making the cold calls or the lost productivity of somebody else doing it. And then there are all the costs involved in any sale you make. Hard costs, labor costs, which can really thin your margin if your cold calling isn't paying out. Creating your lead list is also an associated cost. So either you purchase the list from somebody else or you spend more of your time or your staff's time on creating a list. So what's the opportunity cost there? Before we move on, let's talk about the metrics of cold calling. So there are certain numbers you need to know in order to make good evaluation of your success or expected success in cold calling. First, your conversion rate. Now, that's the average number of dials you need to make in order to schedule a sales meeting. Then you have your closing rate. Now, that's the average number of sales meetings you need to go to before you actually make a sale. And then you have your average sale. So the average value of a single sale. That's after all the expenses. How much do you profit on each sale? Now, what if you don't know these numbers? Well, you start to look at your past behavior. Look at averages for your industry, your target market for cold calling in general. And, if you know your business, you should be able to make an educated guess and then zero in on the number as you become better at it. So with these numbers, you can create a formula to determine either the amount you must call to get a specific result or the expected result from a certain amount of cold calling. So that's your cold calling cookbook. You might want to pause the video and get a pen and paper and start jotting down some of your numbers. So follow this process to determine how many calls you need to make. So first, determine how much you want to make in a given month. Suppose you want $5,000. Divide that by the average amount per sale to determine the number of sales you need each month. So if your average sale is $1,000, then you need 5 sales per month to make your goal. Now, multiply the number of sales by your closing ratio to determine the number of sales meetings that you need. If you close 20% of your meetings, you need 5 meetings to make 1 sale. Then using our example, you'd need to go on 25 sales calls per month. Now multiply that by the closing rate to determine the number of cold calls you need to make in a month. If you have a 0.2% conversion rate, per the Baylor University study, that means you need to make 500 calls to get a single sales appointment. So 500 times 25 is 12,500 cold calls per month. Divide that last number by 20, and you get the number of cold calls you need to make each working day. In this example, 630. And that's assuming you make 50 calls per hour. That's 10 hours of cold call every day, minimum. Using the same process in reverse, you can determine the approximate results of making a certain number of calls per day. For example, using these same numbers, you make 100 cold calls in a day, you'd end up with $800 in sales at the end of the month. Now, what do we do with this information? Well, one, we'd probably recognize that with these numbers, cold calling is not going to pay off. And two, if we want to use cold calling, we might need to find a better way. How about improving the conversion rate? The Baylor Group called random numbers in a geographical area. Of course, there's a lot of failure. So how do we do that better? Well, first we have to narrow the list to include only those that are in your target market. If you're targeting residential with incomes over $100,000 in Grand Rapids, then you probably don't want numbers for commercial businesses in the industrial parks. Two, you got to know who you're trying to reach. Who's going to be making the buying decision? Better to be too high and have them pass you down than too low and have them pass you up. Bottom line, aim for the decision maker. And three, whenever possible, make use of your existing connections. We'll talk more about this in section on networking, but a warm introduction beats a cold call any day of the week. Another thing to look at is what's actually going on the call. So you know your target market, right? Well, are they going to be there at the time you're calling? For residential, that's 6:30 to 8:30 in the evening. For business, that might be 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. The Baylor participants had a script. You need one too. We'll talk about this more in a moment, but in general, if you don't have a standardized message, you'll forget to mention certain information on one hand and end up giving away too much on the other. You got to stick to the information that's going to be most important to your customer. Also, without a standardized process, you have no way to improve yourself. And it's important that the people that are selling truly understand the business and sound intelligent. Basically, you can't just train somebody to sell for you. They need to sell for themselves. Most people have developed the skill to hang up on salespeople quickly. All right? So as soon as we hear something that sounds like a salesperson, we stop listening, we look for the gap, we say not interested, we just hang up, depending on personality type. Come up with an introduction that engages the person on the other end of the phone. So where are these lists that people keep talking about? Well, there's tons of places that are going to want to sell you lists, but the list is only as good as the data that's inside of it. So you can go to a list seller. You can go to places like Salesforce. They'll have opportunities there. General internet searches for lists. You can find somebody. Reference USA. You can go to LinkedIn. You can just use the phone book if you still have one of those. Keep in mind, though, you get what you pay for. If the list sounds too good for the price you're being asked, you might want to continue to look. Bottom line, one way or another, you're going to have to pay. Cash or your time to cultivate leads. So when you look at the list sellers, they're good for both residential and business. They do your research for you. So you say what customer you want and they give those to you. When you contact them, how responsive are they? Did they give you a sample? Are they a good group to work with? Did they sound professional when you talk to them? And then do they scrub the list against the national do not call list? Do they eliminate bad numbers? And then how much per name or number for people in your narrow target market? Do they make a guarantee that the information is accurate? When you use the general web searches or some of the online tools, you can go to association directories, business listings, your Better Business Bureau, all sorts of different areas that you can find information. But remember, those lists that you cultivate on your own may not have been scrubbed against the national do not call list. LinkedIn. So to find specific positions within a company, you can connect with people based on their title, specific individuals, possibly through your own connections. You could actually make that contact on your own. You can search facilities to see if you know somebody who knows somebody, and It really is a great tool on the business side of things, but not going to help you as much on the residential. Salesforce is just going to be a list provider that you can access both online and through a salesperson. Looking at the yellow pages, well, you find the section associated with your target market in each city, the specific type of business you're trying to attract. The online white pages often will let you search by address or street, but you learn little about that person's psychographics or demographics other than their name and where they live. Looking at Zillow, you can find property records to connect with new homeowners, to find out how old the home is, how much it's worth, and whether it's been sold recently. Bottom line, you're going to need a list. It's going to cost you because it's a numbers game. As we mentioned, most people have an automatic response to salespeople. Don't let them smell a salesperson. How would a salesperson start a call? How are you today? I have an offer for you that you won't believe. May I speak to the person in charge of purchasing X? Yeah, maybe try something else. This is a cold call. I'm not sure you're the right person to talk with. Could you help me out with something? Your goal is to get them intrigued enough not to hang up, but more often it's about identifying the need and connecting with the person who needs it. We don't want to sound like a salesperson. A salesperson wouldn't ask for permission. They would simply launch into their sales speech. Would you like to save 20 to 30% on your monthly utility bills? Instead, ask for their permission to go on. Would you be willing to listen for 30 seconds to what I have to say? And at the end of that time, just tell me no thank you. Well, 30 seconds, that sounds kind of reasonable. Maybe you can have some fun with it. I do have an offer, but first, would you like to hear a bad joke? Be careful what joke you pick. Salespeople who we don't want to sound like talk about their business and their product. We install the best energy efficiency systems in the tri-state area. This is all about the salesperson, not about the prospect. The prospect doesn't care. You called them. You need to tell them how you're going to solve their problem that they might not even know they have. If you talk about yourself, it's bragging. If others talk about you, it's information. Tell the story from the perspective of your existing customers. Pick 2 or 3 pains that you solve for that prospect, similar to the one that you're talking with right now. I'm an electrical contractor specializing in energy efficient installations with 50,000 square feet with older wiring, and they're worried about safety issues, or they're sick of paying for the high energy use of the older equipment they have. They say our solutions get to the heart of the problem and they end up saving money. Or maybe something like, our clients, sometimes homeowners in the ABC Acres neighborhood like yourself, call us in when they get shocked by one too many wintertime utility bills. Sometimes they're just afraid for future generations and want to do their part by reducing their carbon footprint. Why do your customers come to you? Ask. You need to have responses ready as well. If they say it's not their problem, ask, oh, I don't suppose you could contact me with a person who does deal with this. Or if they do have the problem, as we talked about, confirm they see it as a problem and they're committed to doing something about it. Would it make sense to invite me into your office for a longer chat about this? If they just say no, you have a choice to make. You can attempt to push back on their resistance, might be able to pressure them into a meeting. The downside of something like that is the meeting set is under pressure and it's more likely to just end up getting canceled. You might ask if they're running into any problems with their energy efficiency. Maybe that's something you can help with. Or if you accept their no, just follow up with, I figured as much. I don't suppose you know any other businesses in the area who might be having these problems. And always thank them for their time. You called them, remember. Now finally, you've got to practice. Come up with an example on your own. Hi, Tom. My name is Bob Smith with ABC Electrical Contractors. I'm not sure if you're the right person I'm supposed to be talking with, but would you be willing to listen to what I'm doing here for just 30 seconds to see if you can tell me if I'm even in the ballpark? Or, I'm a commercial electrical contractor here in the Jackson area. Usually my clients, businesses with large industrial warehouses, come to me because they're worried about whether their electrical usage is way over their competitors and it's costing them their edge. Sometimes they're afraid the utility installations in their older buildings are just running inefficiently and taking a chunk out of their bottom line. Now, I know you run a good company there, but I don't suppose you might be having problems in either of those areas. Make it sound natural. Now, write a script and practice on people. In the next section, we're going to talk about messaging for your energy efficiency projects, as the Business Enhancement Series presented by Efficiency United, Indiana Michigan Power, and Semco Energy Gas Company continues. Click to the next video called Market Messaging for Energy Efficiency Projects.